Hello, and welcome to Virtual Worlds at CASE, a CASE study. My name is Jared Bendis, and I'm creative director of CASE's new media studio, and I wanted to take you through the good, the bad, the ups and the downs of my experiences with virtual worlds. Over the years, not only have these virtual worlds changed, but I've changed as well. I've gone from text to photographic, and from blocky to buff. But the real story starts back in the day when I was just a student at CASE. One of my earliest exposures to virtual worlds would be the text-based adventure Zork. I would spend hours typing my way through this virtual world, exploring, trying to get through the mysteries, figure out what to do. Not only that, but my colleagues, my fraternity brothers and I, we would sit around collaboratively trying to get through the game. We were pretty much geeks back then, so we weren't just interested in how to play the game, but how the game was created. How do you actually design a virtual world with words? It was great to be at CASE in the late 80s, especially because we were home to the Cleveland Freenet. Founded in 1986, it was the first Freenet, and it offered a variety of opportunities that you couldn't get elsewhere. In addition to the discussion forums and one-on-one chat, there was local group chat, as well as a gateway to the IRC, or the Internet Relay Chat, but most importantly was TinyCWRU. TinyCWRU, for CASE Western Reserve University, was a mush, which is a multi-user shared hallucination. This is closely related to a MUD, which is a multi-user dungeon, or in more academic circles, what's known as a multi-user domain. Created in 1989, Tiny was a multiplayer text-based virtual reality game whose purpose was to provide a free service with few restrictions. It had no theme, and its primary activities were coding, chatting, and exploring. We'd found it. It was a multi-user Zork that allowed us to create our own space. Funnily enough, it's actually still online. I contacted the owner of the database, and he still got it running. And it's been up and down over the years, but it was extremely popular and very chaotic. It kind of just grew. People would create things, and they would drift, and it would just grow. And you would always go there, and you'd see people there, and you could talk to them, and they'd be from CASE, or they'd be from other schools. It was just, you'd see people there. Now, the funny thing is, it was banned in almost all the computer labs on campus because it was the great time waster. Also banned in the computer labs was the video game Doom. Now, Doom was banned for a couple reasons. It was banned because it was the great time waster, but it was also banned, at least version 1.0, because it multicasted and basically filled up our network. But it actually got a lot of us thinking. When we were actually able to play head-to-head, we didn't just fight each other, but we collaborated. We actually helped to get each other through the various levels, sometimes in the same room. Plus, we started to design our own levels, not because we wanted to play the game, because it was a way that we could create our own spaces and share spaces with each other, which brings me to what I do now. Now let's jump ahead a few years to modern times, and I'm going to tell you a tale of two professors. The first tale is of a professor who wanted a Moo. There was a technical writing professor who, when he came to CASE, asked that we establish for him a Moo. Now, a Moo is a MUD that's object-oriented. We set up what's called an Encore Moo, which is web-based and designed for education. CWRU, also known as the Moo, was a virtual representation of our campus. We laid out the Moo building by building, room by room, so that walking around the Moo was like walking around our campus. The academic uses range from the English department's technical writing class to the history department's culture and computers, modern languages history of France, and the dean even held orientation meetings to meet some of the incoming freshmen. Some of our more technical students tried to create a little help desk and program virtual bots to actually answer some of the most common questions. The results of the Moo, that's a little trickier. Now, individually, each course met its goals. It was successful on that level. However, as a community, it didn't catch on. We really didn't go and reach out and try to get people who weren't using it in their academic courses to populate the Moo. So when you went in the Moo, you really didn't see anything. It was underpopulated. People just weren't hanging out in the Moo. It was also overbuilt. We had created this very complex structure. We're a pretty big campus, and it may take you 10 minutes to walk across campus. Well, it was just as convoluted to get from point A to point B in the Moo because we designed it to be in parallel. It seemed like a good idea at the time. It really wasn't. We did try to redesign the Moo. We at one point said we're going to start over from scratch, come up with a new idea. Regretfully, we redesigned it too late, and to this day, it's kind of a running gag. Anytime I bring up technology, they always go, well, what about the Moo? It is interesting to note, though, that the Moo is very popular at other schools. Our experiences with it weren't a success, but that mostly had to do with how we approached it. My second tale is about the professor who wouldn't type. There once was a chemistry professor who was teaching a distance learning class, but he wouldn't actually type. We never found out if he couldn't type or if he just wouldn't type, but regardless, he wanted us to come up with some way to prevent him from having to use a keyboard. Well, we did a lot of explorations of technologies, and eventually we came up with a tablet. Interestingly enough, though, this professor was unable to look at the screen while he was using the tablet. And being unable to see what he's writing on the tablet, he was very confused by this. One of our best solutions to this, however, came in the form of a magic slate. We would lay the magic slate on top of the tablet, so when he wrote on it, he could see what he was doing. Now, this has nothing to do with what I'm about to tell you, but in the process of investigating technologies, we came across a very interesting piece of technology. NTT's Interspace is a three-dimensional, collaborative, audio-video virtual world for use in exploration and commerce and a whole bunch of other stuff. It was a really exciting technology that I'd seen at SIGGRAPH one year. Basically, it's a multi-user environment that incorporates audio, video, the avatar heads are actually little video windows, and it's used for exploratory learning. It just makes really great spaces. It's Doom, except it's higher resolution, and it's very, very collaborative. We were really thrilled. The wheels started turning. We just saw this technology and we wanted it. So my boss and I, we put together a quick proposal and we rushed over a bunch of purchase requests to our then vice president. And we asked for a development workstation, 3D models, modeling software, utilities, a server, and of course the Interspace server software. We figured we're just going to go for it. We're going to start this project up. We had some great ideas about how this could really change the way we do things. And surprisingly enough, he bought it. He was thrilled. Signed the recs that day, said go for it. So we ordered everything, and then everything came in but the server software. We had everything on hand, and they wouldn't send us the server software. And the trick is that a recent NT security patch had killed the protocol that they used to communicate. We begged and we pleaded, and eventually they said that they'd give us 2 months to find our own workaround. So they gave us the software and said if we could find our own workaround in 2 months, we could buy it from them with no support. Otherwise, they didn't want to hear from us again. Well, in the end, it was failure. We could not get the software to work. Well, now, after failure comes panic, because we spent all this money, we've got the server, we've got all this stuff, we've got a planned project, but we've got no server to host it on. We've got no solution here. So now we not only have to find a new solution, but one that matches everything that we've already bought. Our solution came in the form of OnLive Traveler from communities.com. It's a multi-user virtual world that's standards-based. It's actually, the worlds are written in VRML 1.0. And what's very interesting about this is that VRML 1.0 is a very old standard. And back in the day, it was way too slow to really work efficiently, but computer technology has caught up with it, so that it actually worked fairly well. Not only that, but pretty much everything would put out VRML 1.0. It's limited in what it can make, but it's a good start. Also, OnLive had what's called directional audio, so that if I'm talking to someone and I'm in front of them, they can hear me, but if they're behind me, they don't hear me as well. So it's actually spatial. That and the avatars, the representations of the people, they weren't photographic, but they were actually emotive. You could actually make them smile and frown and do all different types of things, so you could actually use verbal communication in these worlds as well as nonverbal communication. Here we see my avatar and some of its facial expressions. My student Lee, who actually built my avatar after he built his, basically said that my avatar was the same as his, just fatter and with less hair. I fired him. That, by the way, is not my neck, but his version of my ponytail. We actually had a bunch of academic uses for the OnLive Traveler worlds. For modern languages, we built Les Chastels des Savants, which was our medieval French castle for the teaching of the history of France. For the theater department, we built a Greco-Hellenistic Theatre. For the modern languages department, we also built a Spanish gallery called Vidas. And for orientation, we built some parts of the virtual campus. Now, our virtual reality castle wasn't actually meant to represent a specific place. A, we were limited with what we were going to do in Vermal, and B, we didn't want it to actually have to be perfectly architecturally accurate. We didn't want historians after us. We were going for a representational educational space. What you see here, the colors look a little funny. First, OnLive used a very limited color space. It was a very, very distinct palette that you could use. And as time goes on, the browsers would actually work worse in Windows XP versus Windows 98. So the colors aren't as good as they did when we started this project. Learning from our mistakes, what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that the virtual reality castle would be interesting and informative even if it was empty, even if no one else was using it. So we wanted to make sure it was a multi-user collaborative space, but it was also useful as a single-user space. So here we see the kitchen, and the objects in the kitchen actually link to educational resources. As the project grew, what we'd find is that we had many more educational resources, web links, pictures, videos, than we could actually populate with objects. So we built a database of objects, and each of the links that we created, each of the clicking on the bowl or clicking on the barrel, would actually query the database and give you a little web page listing all those links so that you could actually choose what you wanted to visit. The castle was our first big project, and we tried to kind of give a little variety to it. So here we have a bedroom, and there's tapestries on the wall. And we created a little library, and you click on the goblet, and you get one thing, and the axe is another. Embarrassingly, I'd actually never been to a real castle. So when I finally visited a castle, I realized that I'd made all my rooms way too small. So I went back and created this great hall to create a very collaborative workspace and something that would actually represent a little bit better scale of what a castle would look like. Since Vermal 1 is basically a markup language, we realized that we could have the database not just return a web page with a list of resources, but actually have it create its own virtual reality room. Here we see output from the database that shows you the web resources graphically. What's nice is that students can walk around this room and actually visually see a representation of the database. They can see what period it is, the title of the link, what type of materials it is, but also because this is collaborative, students can talk visually about the results that they're seeing and also about the web pages that they're visiting. So it allows them to look a little bit, stay in the virtual world a little bit longer and actually collaborate about the database itself. A Spanish professor whose students had created web projects asked us to create a virtual gallery. This gallery was to allow them to have an event space to create a virtual event that coincided with a real event that celebrated what the students were studying. One of our theater professors was very interested in actually having the students walk around a theater. So we created, based off of his schematics, a complete Greco-Hellenistic theater. Students could actually see what it would be like to be standing on the stage, what it would be like to be way, way back. Originally they thought that they could perform here, but the directional audio was too sensitive, and if you were way, way back, you really couldn't hear well enough. But they were very interested in seeing what it would be like to perform in one of these virtual environments. And everything was going great until Communities.com went under. It's what I call a victim of the VR cycle. Basically, what happens is some company comes up with some new VR technology, which usually isn't all that new anyway. They surround it with a whole lot of hype. They really believe in what they're selling, and they decide to host some big event. They'll get a rock star, they'll get a model, they'll get somebody famous there. They'll coincide it with something event. They'll get a lot of people to come in, they'll get a lot of people to download it. The problem is a lot of these companies forget that they need to also have a financial model. They usually don't have a way of collecting money, a product that they're selling. They don't realize that they actually have to have something that people will want to buy. A lot of people just don't come back. There's no reason to return. When the hype is over, they don't like what's left. There's nobody there. There's not enough content. It's just not useful. and then the company folds. Now, this isn't a rule, but I've seen this happen a lot, and it usually happens with technology very similar to what I just showed you. There are a couple of companies that have stayed successful over the years, but a lot of times, a lot of things just disappear. The results of our OnLive Traveler virtual worlds were actually quite successful. Each course got out of it exactly what they wanted out of it. And even more so than that, we found that some of these virtual environments were very recyclable. People actually could find multiple uses for that castle, or other people who wanted to see that theater. Even more so, we actually are requested to, can you make a virtual world for us? But as time has passed, the browser and the server have become less and less compatible with modern computers and modern operating systems, and with Communities.com out of business and no further development, we basically went into maintenance mode. We're going to kind of hold off until we can find something that's going to really solve our future problems. Now, we may have found our answer in Adobe Atmosphere, and of course we're banking on it because we've started up some new projects. Now, Adobe Atmosphere says good graphics, and I'll actually go and say it's got some pretty great graphics. It's in active development. It has inexpensive development tools. Regretfully, it does lack the audio chat that the language department and some of the theater department people really liked. Also, it's got what I refer to as a unique design perspective, or you got to really think differently when you go to actually design for it. The tools aren't as intuitive as you might hope, but once you get over that hump, it's pretty useful. And of course, with every new environment comes a new avatar. This is me as I'm viewed inside of Adobe Atmosphere. Now, we're just starting to work in Atmosphere here, and I'm playing with some of the ideas about making some common spaces. Plus, I've got some here as the foundation of what's called the Halls of Time project. And the Halls of Time project is going to be our first big Atmospheres project. It's a history course, and we're going to take some of the best things that we've learned in our previous experiences with OnLive and apply it here. And we're going to create a gallery of student work. And that is going to be student essays, student research, and they're going to be located and housed inside of the Halls of Time. So it's going to grow over the years. We're also going to go back and revisit a lot of our OnLive Traveler worlds. Some of these still have utility. Now, whether they get ported, whether they get redesigned, we're going to have to deal with the faculty there. But there's some good knowledge there. We've actually spent some good R&D, and we're going to see if maybe it's still going to be useful to us. But unlike what we've done previously, one of the things that I think is key here is we are going to promote a student community of builders and users. That's what we were missing previously with the Moo, and that's what we really need here, is we need to get the students using it. And if the students are building and the students are using, then we'll actually see a lot more acceptance of it. More importantly, if we've got student builders out there building on their own, we'll have trained staff when we go to hire them. We're also going to promote a faculty community of builders and users. We want to get everyone involved. We want to make this a place that people hang out. We want to make this a place that people actually use and collaborate. We want to have a place that for whatever they want to use it for, it's there. In conclusion, I'd like to sum up my experience with virtual worlds by saying it's been fun and exciting, challenging and frustrating, rewarding and disappointing. You need to prepare for the worst, be open to change, and most importantly, to get people involved. For further information on some of the technologies seen in this presentation, you can visit the Encore Moo homepage, the Digital Space Traveler, which holds the licenses to the former OnLive Traveler system, the Adobe Atmosphere site, or for more information about Inform interactive fiction like the Zork game, you can go here. I'd also like to take a moment to thank my colleague Sharon Shinacariello, who collaborated with me on most of the projects that you saw in this presentation. I'd like to thank you for viewing this presentation and also invite you to visit the New Media Studio website or to email me if you have any further questions. And I thank you again.